Mark Ellison believed this dinner was his golden ticket. He was a man on the rise, his world defined by spreadsheets and stock tickers, and the exclusive La Sfera d'Oro was the ultimate symbol of his arrival. His wife Helen was just a simple, quiet accessory he'd dragged along an embarrassment he had to tolerate. But as he sat under the crystal chandeliers, fueled by expensive wine and a desperate need to impress, he unleashed a torrent of cruel public insults. He failed to notice the man watching from the shadows. Mark was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, because that man, the legendary owner of the entire restaurant empire, was about to call Mark's wife daughter. The Thursday of the dinner began like any other day in the meticulously curated beige and grey apartment of Mark and Helen Ellison. Mark, a man who at 34 was already losing his hair, but compensated with viciously expensive razor-sharp suits, stood at the marble kitchen island. He wasn't drinking his coffee. He was critiquing it. "Helen, this is mud," he said, pushing the porcelain mug away. "The grinder settings are clearly off. I've told you a burr grinder needs consistent calibration. It's not a toy." Helen, dressed in a simple grey knit sweater that seemed to drain the colour from her face, said nothing. She merely took the mug, her movements economical and silent, and poured the $40 a pound coffee down the drain. She had become a creature of silence. In the 5 years they had been married, her world had contracted to the dimensions of this apartment, to the precise, exacting and suffocating standards of her husband. Mark worked as a junior portfolio manager at Sterling Price Capital, a firm with a name like polished granite. He was good at his job, but he wasn't exceptional. He wasn't the Ivy League old money type that glided effortlessly up the corporate ladder. He was a grinder, a striver, a man perpetually terrified of being exposed as the middle-class Ohio native he was. He saw status as a zero-sum game, and to ensure his own rise, he had to push someone else down. The closest and safest target was always Helen. He had met her at a small cafe, the Daily Grind, where she was sketching in a notebook. She had seemed simple. Her clothes were unremarkable, her demeanor gentle and unassuming. She was beautiful in a quiet, forgettable way, or so he'd thought. She was the perfect blank canvas onto which he could project the image of a successful man. He had rescued her from what he assumed was a life of aimless bohemian poverty. He gave her this apartment, he paid for her clothes, which he picked out, and in return he expected flawless, silent adoration. What he received instead was a quiet, unshakable melancholy that he found profoundly irritating. "You are going to be ready at 7 o'clock sharp," he commanded, pulling on his trench coat. "Not 7:01, not 7:02. 7. The reservation at La Sfera d'Oro is at 8, and I will not be late because you couldn't manage a simple timeline." Helen finally looked up. Her eyes, a deep, startling shade of amber, held a flicker of something. Fear. "Mark, it's just, that place is so expensive. Are you sure we could just go to Luigi's?" Mark let out a sound of pure disgust. "Luigi's, that red-checked tablecloth slop house." "Helen, this is not one of your little animal shelter fundraisers. This is La Sfera d'Oro. I just closed the Henderson account. I deserve to be there. And as my wife, you will be there, and you will not embarrass me. Wear the black dress, the one I bought you. Not whatever that shapeless sack is." He gestured to her sweater, and without waiting for a reply, he was out the door, the deadbolt clicking shut with a sound of finality. Helen stood in the kitchen for a long time. The silence of the apartment was a living thing, heavy and cold. She went to the closet and pulled out the dress. It was a severe black sheath by a designer Mark admired. It was expensive, beautifully made, and she hated it. It felt like a uniform. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a ghost. Where had she gone? The girl who loved to paint, who laughed loudly, who spoke 3 languages. She had vanished, eroded day by day by Mark's relentless acid-drip condescension. He thought her family was poor, maybe farmers from the Midwest. He'd mocked her simple background dozens of times. "You just don't understand these things, Helen," he would say. "It's not your fault. You weren't raised with it." She had never corrected him. She had let him believe the lie. She had met him during her great escape, her attempt to live a normal life, anonymous and free from the crushing weight of her family name. She had wanted just once to be loved for who she was, not for what she was. She had found Mark, and in her desperate search for normal, she had stumbled into something far, far worse than the gilded cage she'd fled. That evening she applied her makeup with the precision of a soldier. She put on the black dress. She styled her dark hair exactly as he preferred. It pulled back in a severe, joyless chignon. When the clock read 6:59 p.m., she was standing by the door, her simple cloth coat in hand, her face a mask of placid obedience. When Mark arrived, he gave her a critical once-over. "Fine," he clipped. "You'll do. Now, for God's sake, Helen, remember the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't order for yourself. I'll handle it. And whatever you do, don't try to be interesting. Just smile and nod. Can you manage that?" "Yes, Mark," she whispered. "Good." He grabbed his keys. "Let's go. I'm not about to lose a table at La Sfera because you were daydreaming about stray cats." As they stepped into the elevator, Helen's stomach twisted. It wasn't the restaurant that scared her. She had grown up in places like La Sfera d'Oro. She wasn't scared of the cost, or the waiters, or the wine list. She was scared because La Sfera d'Oro, the Golden Sphere, was her father's flagship. It was the crown jewel of the Romano Hospitality Group. And she hadn't spoken to her father, Antonio Romano, in 5 years. The drive to the restaurant was a symphony of Mark's anxieties played out as a series of aggressive lane changes and muttered curses. He honked at a taxi that lingered too long at a yellow light. "Move, you peasant. Don't you know what a turn signal is?" He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his leased BMW, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Did you review the file I sent you?" he snapped. Helen, startled from her own anxious thoughts, blinked. "What file?" "The file, Helen." "The one on the Harrisons, Richard Harrison, CEO of Apex Logistics. His wife, Catherine. I told you they always dine at La Sfera on Thursdays. This isn't just a celebration, it's an opportunity. If I can get 5 minutes with Harrison, just plant the seed. It could be huge." I must have missed it, Mark. I was at the shelter all day. We had a new intake. I don't care." He cut her off, his voice flat and cold. "I simply don't care about the mangy animals. I'm trying to build an empire, and you're busy wiping noses. Just be quiet. I need to focus." Helen turned her head to the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. The empire Mark was building was built on a foundation of debt and desperation. She knew because she managed their finances, a task he'd dumped on her, calling it simple housekeeping. She knew about the maxed-out credit cards, the secret loan he'd taken to cover a bad market bet. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a performance, a desperate gamble. They pulled up to the restaurant. La Sfera d'Oro was not flashy. It was old-world, discreet, and terrifyingly powerful. It was a converted 19th-century bank, all granite columns and massive bronze doors. There was no neon sign, just a small, burnished gold plaque that read, Romano. A valet dressed in a sharp black uniform opened Helen's door before Mark had even put the car in park. "Good evening, madame." Mark practically threw his keys at another valet. "Be careful with it. It's a 5 Series. The valet just smiled a polite, empty smile that had seen 1,000 insecure men in leased BMWs. They walked through the bronze doors into a hushed lobby. The air itself felt different, thick with the scent of old money beeswax and a faint, complex aroma of truffles and wine. The sound was muffled, a civilized hum of quiet conversation, and the distant melodic clink of heavy silver on fine porcelain. The maitre d', a tall, impossibly elegant man in a velvet smoking jacket, stood behind a century-old mahogany podium. His name was Jean-Pierre, and Helen had known him since she was a child. He used to sneak her marzipan fruits from the kitchen. He looked up as they approached. His eyes, professionally blank, swept over Mark, cataloguing his suit, his watch, his nervous energy. Then his eyes landed on Helen. For a single agonizing second, the mask of the perfect maitre d' shattered. His eyes widened. A micro-expression of shock recognition and profound confusion passed over his face. He almost said her name. Helen could see the E form on his lips. She gave him the tiniest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A desperate, silent plea. Jean-Pierre, a consummate professional, recovered in an instant. The mask was back, welded in place, but his voice when he spoke was a fraction too stiff. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Ellison," Mark said, puffing his chest out. "Mark Ellison. For 2. 8 o'clock." "Of course, Mr. Ellison." Jean-Pierre did not consult his book. He knew every reservation. "This way, please." He led them through the main dining room. It was magnificent. A 3-tiered crystal chandelier, rumored to have been taken from a Venetian palace, hung from a soaring, frescoed ceiling. Tables were spaced far apart, creating islands of privacy. The other diners were a mix of old money families in quiet tweed and pearls and new money tech billionaires in $5,000, quiet luxury sweaters. Mark was practically vibrating. He spotted his target. "There they are," he hissed, grabbing Helen's elbow. "The Harrisons. We're 2 tables away. Perfect." As they were seated, Helen felt a presence. She looked toward a shadowed alcove near the kitchen entrance. A man was standing there, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the room. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a face that looked carved from Italian marble, and eyes as dark and sharp as obsidian. He wore a Brioni suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him. It was her father, Antonio Romano. Their eyes met across the expanse of the dining room. Helen's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her father's expression was unreadable, a block of stone. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since the day she'd walked out of his life, leaving a note on her pillow. She quickly dropped her gaze, her hands trembling in her lap. "What's wrong with you?" Mark hissed, opening his menu. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't be so provincial, Helen. Try to act like you belong." Helen couldn't speak. She just picked up her water glass, the heavy crystal cold against her trembling fingers. Her father was here. He was watching. And her husband was a ticking time bomb. This night, she realized, was not just going to be bad. It was going to be a catastrophe. The dinner began. It was less a meal and more a trial. A young waiter, nervous and starstruck, poured their water. Mark waved him away, as if he were a fly. "We'll have the San Pellegrino, the large bottle, and I'll need to see the sommelier." When the sommelier, a prim French woman named Corinne, arrived with the leather-bound wine list Mark put on a show, he swirled his empty glass, sniffed it, and then held the list up to the light, as if he were deciphering an ancient text. "I'm looking for something robust," he announced, his voice a little too loud. "A Bordeaux. Perhaps the, Chateau Pavé." He horribly mispronounced Pavie. Corinne the sommelier gave a polite, tight-lipped smile. "An excellent choice, monsieur. The Chateau Pavie is a remarkable Saint-Emilion. Very bold," she pointed. "We have the 2005. It is $2,400. Mark's blood ran cold. He had been pointing at a $240 bottle on the previous page. He tried to recover a red flush creeping up his neck. "Ah, yes. A bit young, don't you think I'll have the Malbec, the Cahors from Argentina?" "As you wish, monsieur," Corinne said, gliding away. Helen knew what Mark had done. He had tried to order a famous French wine, panicked at the price, and defaulted to a Malbec from Cahors, France, but called it Argentina to sound worldly, accidentally mixing up his regions. It was a small, clumsy mistake, but in a place like this it was a social gunshot. Mark, furious at his own error and the sommelier's polite correction, turned his simmering rage onto the only safe target he had. "This," he said, gesturing with his fork, "is what real class is, Helen. Not that cheap, sticky-floored diner you're so fond of. People here understand quality. They understand worth." Helen stayed silent, her eyes fixed on her bread plate. "Are you even listening to me?" he demanded, his voice a low hiss. "Look at you. You're sulking. We are in the finest restaurant in the city, an establishment you could never have dreamed of entering, and you're sulking." "I'm not sulking, Mark. I'm just taking it in." "Taking it in. You look like a lost puppy. Straighten your back. For God's sake, at least pretend you have some breeding." From the corner of her eye, Helen saw him. Her father. He was no longer in the alcove. He was circulating, moving from table to table, a quiet word here, a nod there. He was the conductor of this magnificent orchestra. He hadn't come near their table, but Helen felt his presence like a change in the atmospheric pressure. He knew she was here. He was watching. He was waiting. The first course arrived, a delicate, seared scallop on a bed of parsnip puree. Mark devoured his in 2 bites. Helen, her appetite gone, picked at hers. "What's wrong? Is the food too complicated for you?" Mark sneered. "I'm sorry they don't have chicken nuggets. You can't just nibble, Helen. You look weak. It's unattractive." He refilled his wine glass. The alcohol was loosening his already thin filter. He looked over at the Harrisons' table. Richard Harrison, the CEO, was laughing at something his wife said. This was Mark's moment. "I'm going to go. Pay my respects," he said, standing up and adjusting his tie. "Mark, don't," Helen whispered, a genuine plea. "They're in the middle of their meal. It's not the time." "What would you know about the time?" he snapped. "What would you know about networking, about ambition? Your biggest ambition for the day is deciding which sad-eyed dog to pet. You stay here, and try not to spill anything." He walked over to the Harrisons' table. Helen watched in horror. It was a car crash in slow motion. Mark was too loud. His gestures were too broad. She saw Richard Harrison's polite smile become fixed, then strained. Mark was trying to give him a business card. Catherine Harrison, his wife, was looking at Mark with open, undisguised annoyance. After a brutal 2-minute monologue from Mark, Richard Harrison finally clapped him on the shoulder in a clear gesture of dismissal. Mark returned to the table, his face a mask of thunder. He was humiliated. He had been brushed off. He said he's not interested in new portfolios right now. Mark mumbled, slumping into his chair. It's okay, Mark, Helen said softly, trying to soothe him. He was with his wife. Don't, Mark seethed. Don't you dare. It's okay, Mark, me. This is your fault. My fault how? Your energy, he spat, searching for a target. Your negative, mousy, poor energy. It's dragging me down. I'm sitting here trying to make us a better life, and I'm shackled to a woman who probably thinks escargot is a type of car. The main courses arrived. Mark had ordered the $150 Wagyu steak. Helen, a vegetarian, had the risotto. Mark took a bite of his steak. Incredible. He sighed, his mood shifting slightly. He looked at Helen's plate. Risotto. Rice and mushrooms. How pathetic. It's peasant food, Helen. You can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you can't, as they say. He was getting louder. The couple at the table next to them, an older pair, glanced over with disapproval. This was it, the main event, the crescendo of his humiliation. He had failed to impress the Harrisons. He had been subtly insulted by the sommelier, and now he needed to re-establish his dominance. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, cruel whisper that was paradoxically loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. You know, Helen, I've tried. I really have. I tried to polish you up. I bought you clothes, I taught you which fork to use. But you're just hopeless. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Mark, please. Stop it. You're drunk. I'm not drunk, he declared, his voice rising to a sharp bark. I'm enlightened. I'm sitting here looking at you, and I'm finally realizing the truth. I married down Helen. I married so far down I'm practically at sea level. The nearby tables went silent. The clinking of silver stopped. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', froze his eyes wide, looking toward the alcove. Mark, Helen whispered, her voice trembling. You are making a scene. Am I? Mark said, a wild, reckless light in his eyes. He was enjoying the audience. Or am I just speaking the truth? What would you know about it? Your family are probably turnip farmers from... Where was it? Some god-forsaken patch of dirt in Ohio. You sit there in a dress that costs more than your entire family's yearly income, and you dare to tell me to be quiet. He threw his napkin onto his plate. Just sit there and look pretty, Helen. It's the one thing you're supposed to be good at, and you can't even manage that. The silence in the restaurant was no longer polite. It was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Helen was frozen, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a silent statue of humiliation. Mark looked around, a king on a temporary, pathetic throne, and then a shadow fell over the table. The shadow was tall and broad. Mark, annoyed at the interruption, looked up, ready to wave away another waiter. It was not a waiter. It was Antonio Romano. He stood beside their table, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not looking at Mark. His entire formidable presence was focused on Helen. His face, which had been a mask of stone earlier, was now etched with a profound, aching sadness. He looked at the tear track on her cheek, and his expression hardened. A cold, controlled fury surfaced in his dark eyes, like a glacier carving into a frozen sea. Mark, realizing who this was, scrambled to his feet. His chair screeched backward on the marble floor, a sound that cut through the silence like a scream. Mr. Romano. Mark sputtered, his face instantly slick with sweat. The bravado of 30 seconds ago evaporated, leaving behind the terrified, striving boy from Ohio. Sir, what an honor, a true honor. I'm Mark Ellison, Sterling Price Capital. My wife and I were just enjoying this magnificent steak. Truly. My compliments to you, I guess. He let out a short, high-pitched laugh that died in his throat. Antonio Romano did not acknowledge him. He did not turn. He did not even blink. He continued to gaze at Helen, his voice low and heavy, but carrying across the silent room. It was thick with the Italian accent he never bothered to lose. "Helen," he said. Helen flinched as if struck. She slowly, agonizingly lifted her head. Her tear-filled amber eyes met her father's. "Helen," he said again, softer this time. "Figlia mia." My daughter. He reached out a large, ringed hand and gently, almost reverently, brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain that silenced the entire restaurant. "Why didn't you tell me you were here? Why are you letting this verme speak to you this way?" Mark's world tilted. The blood rushed from his head, replaced by a roaring, static white noise. "Daughter figlia mia!" He looked from Antonio, the legend, the billionaire, the man who owned this city, to Helen, his mousy, simple, trailer park wife. And for the first time, he saw her. He saw the identical proud set of her jaw. He saw the same dark, intelligent, obsidian-flecked eyes. He saw the high cheekbones and the noble line of her nose. She wasn't a forgettably pretty girl. She was Helen Romano, and she was a mirror of the man standing beside her. It wasn't a nickname. It wasn't a mistake. "Papa," Helen whispered, and the word shattered the last of Mark's denial. She reached up and grasped her father's hand. Antonio Romano's gaze finally shifted to Mark. It was not the hot, explosive anger Mark might have expected. It was something far, far worse. It was the arctic, cold, dismissive gaze of a god swatting at an insect. It was the look of pure, concentrated power. "You," Antonio said. The single word was an indictment. "You are the man who married my Helen." Mark's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He was choking on his own ambition. I, Mr. Romano. Sir, there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "No," Antonio said, his voice flat. "There is no misunderstanding. I have been watching. I have heard enough. I have heard everything." Mark looked around wildly. The Harrisons were staring Richard Harrison's face, a mask of utter contempt. The old couple at the next table were looking at him as if he were something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. He was not just a guest. He was a pariah. "Helen, tell him," Mark pleaded, turning to his wife. "Tell him it was a joke. It was just banter. Tell him I love you." Helen looked at him, and the woman he saw was not the one he'd left the apartment with. The mousy, broken wife was gone. In her place was a woman of ice and fire. The mask of the simple girl had melted away, revealing the Romano heiress beneath. "No, Mark," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority he had never heard. No more. Antonio Romano raised one hand, a subtle gesture. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', was instantly at his side, along with two other men. They were not waiters. They were large, impeccably dressed, and wore earpieces. They were Antonio's personal security. Jean-Pierre, Antonio said, his voice quiet but final. Bring Mr. Ellison his coat. His meal is finished. No. Mark shrieked, panic overriding his paralysis. You can't. Helen, you can't let him do this. This is my life, the Harrison account. I'll be ruined. You were ruined, Antonio said, his voice like chipped granite, the moment you raised your voice to my daughter. The two security men took Mark by the elbows. They were not rough, but their grip was non-negotiable. My steak. I didn't even... Mark stammered, his mind short-circuiting. The steak is on the house, Antonio said dismissively. Now get this thing out of my restaurant. Helen! Helen! Mark yelled as they began to walk him, then drag him towards the door. But Helen had already turned her back on him. She was crying into her father's chest, her shoulders shaking as 5 years of pain, fear, and silence finally broke free. The last thing Mark Ellison saw before he was thrown out of the bronze doors and onto the cold, unforgiving sidewalk was the sight of Antonio Romano, the king of La Sfera d'Oro, holding his daughter as if she were the only precious thing in the world. The restaurant remained hushed. Antonio led a trembling Helen away from the table, guiding her through a discreet door marked private that Mark had never even noticed. It led into a study that was more like a command center. Dark mahogany walls were lined with books. A large desk sat in the center, and one wall was a bank of security monitors, showing every angle of the dining room. Antonio sat her down on a plush leather sofa and barked a request into an intercom. Coffee. Brandy. Now. He sat opposite her, not as the titan of industry, but as a father. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, fury, relief, and a devastating, bottomless guilt. Why? He asked again, his voice raw. Helen, my heart, il mio cuore. Why this? Why him? Helen was quiet for a long moment, sipping the brandy a waiter had brought with silent speed. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the bone-deep chill. Because he wasn't you, Papa, she finally said, her voice small. Antonio recoiled as if she had slapped him. He wasn't you, she continued, finding her strength. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, he wasn't smart. He was just a man. A normal, striving, ambitious man. And he didn't want Helen Romano. He wanted Helen Vance, a quiet girl he met in a coffee shop. This was her story, her great escape. 5 years ago, Helen Romano had been the most coveted and most suffocated heiress in the city. Her father, made paranoid by his own wealth, saw every man as a predator, a gold digger. He was loving, but his love was a fortress. There had been David, a curator at the museum. Helen thought she loved him. He was kind, he was smart, he made her laugh. But one day her father had sat her down in this very office and presented a dossier, a file compiled by his private investigators. David was in deep gambling debt. He had been feeding information about the Romano family to a tabloid. Helen was heartbroken. It wasn't the first time. Her father had destroyed every relationship she'd ever had. I am protecting you, Helen, he had thundered. They don't love you. They love this. He had gestured to the restaurant, the Empire. "And how will I ever know?" she had screamed back at him. "How will I ever find someone who just loves me?" When you're standing in the way, shining a spotlight on the money. That night she had packed a bag. She accessed a small trust fund her grandmother had left her, one her father didn't control. She changed her last name to Vance, her mother's maiden name. She got a small, simple apartment, started volunteering at the animal shelter, and for the first time in her life, she was anonymous. 2 months later, Mark Ellison had sat down at her table at the daily grind. He seemed so normal. She wept, the story pouring out of her. He was stressed about his job. He complained about his car. He didn't know a thing about art, and he thought vintage just meant old. He was simple, and he liked me, the me I was pretending to be. I was so desperate to be loved for myself that I fell for the first man who didn't know my last name. But that animal! Antonio growled, the fury returning. That thing he said to you at the table, how long? It started small, Helen admitted ashamed. A little comment about my clothes, a criticism of my friends from the shelter. Then he suggested I quit. He said it was unseemly. Then he just started chipping away at me. Papa, he called me stupid. He told me I was lucky he saved me. He isolated me, and I was too proud to come home. I was too ashamed to admit that my great escape was a failure, that I had run from your gilded cage just to lock myself in his. I thought I had made my bed. I thought I had to lie in it. Antonio's face was pale. You are a Romano. You are my blood. You are the only good thing I have ever built. And you thought I would rather you be miserable than be safe. You thought my pride was more important than you. He knelt before her, a move that would have shocked the financial world. The great Antonio Romano on his knees, he took both her hands. "Helen, I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I was so obsessed with protecting my legacy, I forgot to protect my daughter. I drove you away. I drove you to him. I saw only the gold diggers, and I was blind to the monster. Perdona-me. Forgive me." "Oh, Papa," she cried, and they held each other, a father and daughter healing a 5-year wound in the heart of their empire. After a few minutes, Antonio's demeanor shifted. The father receded, and the CEO returned, but this time his focus was singular. He stood up and went to his desk. "This, Mark Ellison," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "He is an asset manager at Sterling Price Capital." Helen nodded. "A junior manager." Antonio picked up his phone. He didn't dial. He spoke to his assistant. "Get me Robert Sterling. At his home. Yes, I know it's 9 p.m. Get him, and while you're at it, get me the name of the top divorce attorney in this city, the most vicious one we have." He looked at Helen, his eyes now clear and hard. "You are my daughter, Helen. You are an heiress. But more than that, you are a Romano. And we do not tolerate parasites." Mark landed hard on the granite sidewalk. The bronze doors of La Sfera d'Oro slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet, wealthy street. For a moment he just stood there, dazed, his mind a scramble of stake stock tickers and the horrifying image of Antonio Romano's face. This isn't happening," he muttered. He straightened his $2,000 suit jacket, which was now wrinkled from the security guard's grip. "This is a nightmare." He fumbled for his phone. He had to call Helen. He had to fix this. He'd apologize. He'd beg. He'd He'd threaten her. He'd tell her. What could he possibly threaten her with? The simple poor wife was a lie. He was the simple poor one. He dialed her number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Helen, pick up the phone. You can't just... This is insane. You call me back. You hear me? You call me back right now. He tried again. The call didn't even go through. It went straight to a "This number is not in service" recording. Blocked. A cold, sharp panic, far colder than the October night air, seized him. He looked up. The Harrisons. His career. He had to get ahead of this. He had to call his boss, explain. Something. He dialed his boss's number. Voicemail. He hailed a cab, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get his wallet out. 22nd and Park, he barked. Their apartment, his apartment. He had to get to her. She couldn't lock him out. As the cab sped through the city, his phone buzzed. A text. From his boss. Don't bother coming in tomorrow, Mark, or ever. We'll mail you your things. No. Mark whispered. No. He tried to call. The number was blocked. He tried to email. His corporate account was already deactivated. Access denied. Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Price Capital, was one of Antonio Romano's oldest friends. They played golf together every Sunday. The phone call from Antonio had lasted less than 60 seconds. That was all it took to end Mark's career. He stumbled out of the cab and ran to his apartment building. The doorman, who usually greeted him with a "Good evening, Mr. Ellison," stepped in front of him, his face impassive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. I can't let you up." "What are you talking about, Charles? It's my apartment. Get out of my way." "My instructions are clear, sir. You are not to be admitted to the premises." "Instructions from who from?" "Helen. She can't do that. The lease is in my name." "The lease, sir," Charles said, his voice flat, "is on a building owned by a subsidiary of the Romano Hospitality Group. We were informed there is a new primary leaseholder, Mrs. Ellison, or rather, Miss Romano. Now please, sir, or I'll have to call the police." Mark backed away, his mind imploding. The building. He had lived here for 5 years. He'd chosen this building himself. He'd told Helen he got a great deal on it. He never knew. She had let him pretend. He looked up at the 14th floor window at his lights, his life. It was all a sham. He hadn't rescued her. She had been curating him. A black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit, not a security guard, but a lawyer, stepped out. "Mr. Mark Ellison." "Who are you?" Mark spat. "My name is Daniel Weiss. I represent Helen Romano." He handed Mark a thick manila envelope. "You have just been served." Mark ripped it open. His eyes scanned the words. Dissolution of marriage. Restraining order. Temporary. Immediate eviction. "You can't," Mark breathed. "The assets, our accounts, my money." "What money, Mr. Ellison?" Weiss asked, his voice smooth as silk. "According to our preliminary review, your personal accounts are significantly leveraged. The credit cards you've been using are in fact part of a supplemental corporate account for the Romano Group, which your wife graciously let you believe was your own. That line of credit has been terminated." Mark's blood turned to ice. The BMW, the suits, the dinner. "There is, however," the lawyer continued, "the matter of the prenuptial agreement." Mark's heart leapt. The prenup. He had insisted on it. He, Mark Ellison, the finance guy, had insisted on a prenup to protect his future earnings from the simple girl with no prospects. He remembered the clause, all assets acquired prior to the marriage, and any assets derived from familiar inheritance shall remain the sole property of the individual. He had signed it smugly, thinking he was protecting himself from her. He looked at the lawyer, a tiny, desperate shred of hope in his eyes. The lawyer smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Ms. Romano is, of course, prepared to honor that agreement fully. She will keep her assets. And you, Mr. Ellison, may keep yours. Good evening. Daniel Weiss got back in the car and drove away, leaving Mark Ellison standing on the sidewalk holding a useless stack of papers, a man with nothing but the suit on his back and a life that had just been deleted. While Mark was imploding on the sidewalk, Helen was in her father's study, a team of lawyers and assistants moving around her. The mousy wife was gone. In her place was a CEO in waiting. She was sharp, decisive, and focused. The apartment is secure, Daniel Weiss said, re-entering the study. He's been served. Good, Helen said, and the accounts frozen. Antonio said, a dark satisfaction in his voice. The lease on his car is terminated. His firm has let him go. He is, as of this moment, a man with no job, no car, and no home. Helen nodded, but she felt no pleasure, just a cold, empty relief. The relief of a limb being amputated to stop a spreading poison. Papa, she said, turning to him, what he did, he was cruel. He was a monster. But I let him be. Helen, no, Antonio started. Yes, she insisted. I hid. I hid from you, I hid from my name, and I hid from myself. I let him shrink me down because I was afraid to be big. I was so afraid of being Helen Romano, the heiress, that I let him convince me I was Helen Ellison, the nothing. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down on the city lights. He called me stupid papa for 5 years, and the woman who speaks 3 languages and has a degree in art history from Yale. I believed him. That is what abusers do, tesoro mio, Antonio said gently. They isolate. They diminish. It is not your fault. It's not my fault, she agreed, but it is my responsibility to fix it. I ran away from this. She gestured around the opulent room. I ran away from the Romano name because I thought it was a prison, but I was wrong. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a new hard-won fire. This name isn't a prison, Papa. It's a weapon, and I've let it rust. I let a man like Mark Ellison hurt me, and I had all this power at my fingertips and refused to use it. Antonio watched his daughter, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. The girl who had run away was gone. A woman had returned. A queen. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to come home, she said, but not to the guest room. I want an office. I want to work. Antonio smiled. The Romano Foundation, the philanthropic arm, your mother. She always wanted you to run it. It's been sitting waiting for you. The foundation, Helen said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Mark, he always hated my volunteer work. He said it was beneath me. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. He had no idea. He thought he was up here, and I was down there. He never realized he wasn't even in the building. She looked at her father. I want to focus the foundation on domestic abuse, on shelters for women and children who have nowhere to run, for women who don't have a billionaire father to call. Antonio Romano put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Then that, he said, is what we will do. Welcome home, Helen." 6 months passed. The chill of that October night had given way to the damp, burgeoning heat of a New York spring. But Mark Ellison wasn't in New York. He was in Des Moines, Iowa. He now called himself Mark Hill. Ellison was a name so toxic it was radioactive. The story of the husband at La Sfera had become a quiet, vicious legend on Wall Street, a cautionary tale whispered over $30 cocktails. He was not just fired, he was blacklisted, excommunicated. No firm would touch him. His name was a synonym for career suicide. The lawsuits had been swift. The debts he'd hidden, the ones Helen had known about all along, were called in. The Romano legal team had advanced him the money to pay them an act he first mistook for mercy. But it was not mercy. It was a tactical move. He was no longer in debt to a dozen faceless banks. He was in debt to one entity, the Romano Group, and they were garnishing his wages. He had pawned his watch. He had sold his cufflinks. He had fled New York on a midnight bus landing in the first city that felt far enough away. His new life was a shade of beige so bleak it made his old apartment look like a carnival. He lived in a 300-square-foot studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. The air perpetually smelled of warm bleach and mildew, and the flashing pink and blue neon "open" sign was the only light he had after dark. He worked in a sprawling, windowless cubicle farm for a third-party logistics company. His portfolio was gone. He now managed shipping manifests. His job for 8 agonizing hours a day was to cross-reference invoices for pallets of kitty litter and paper towels. The irony was a constant, dull-edged knife in his gut. He who had mocked her for caring about stray animals now tracked the supplies for them. It was a Friday night. He was in a brightly lit, sterile supermarket called Heartland Grocers. His basket contained a single frozen lasagna, a generic brand 6-pack of beer, and a bar of soap. He was at the checkout, his eyes glazed when he saw it. On the magazine rack between Angler's Weekly and Good Housekeeping was the cover of Forbes, and on the cover was Helen. He stopped breathing. It wasn't the mousy, quiet woman he had bullied. It wasn't the terrified girl in the black dress. The woman on the cover was a stranger. Her dark hair was cut in a severe, stylish, and impossibly chic bob. She was wearing a crimson suit that looked like it had been sculpted from a block of pure, confident power. Her amber eyes, once downcast, now stared directly into the camera, and they were not just intelligent. They were dangerous. He snatched the magazine, his hands trembling. The headline blazed in bold white letters. The New Face of Philanthropy. Helen Romano. How the heiress reclaimed her name and built a new empire of hope. He stumbled out of the line, leaving his basket behind, and tore the magazine open. The article was a 10-page spread. It detailed the Helen's Haven initiative. In just 6 months, she had leveraged her father's capital and her own ferocious intelligence to fund, build, and open 3 state-of-the-art women's shelters, with 2 more under construction. She hadn't just thrown money at a problem. She had rebuilt the entire system from the ground up, incorporating legal aid job training and psychological counseling. He read a quote from the mayor of New York. Helen Romano doesn't just ask for change. She arrives with a binder, a team of lawyers, and a non-negotiable timeline. She's the most effective force in this city. He kept reading, his blood turning to ice. Many were surprised by Ms. Romano's sudden aggressive entry into the public sphere, the article read. For years, She was famously private, dedicating her time to anonymous volunteer work at local animal shelters. Then came the paragraph that stopped his heart. Ms. Romano is herself a survivor. Her new passion, friends say, was forged in the fires of a brief, unfortunate first marriage to a man who sources say spectacularly and publicly underestimated his wife. When asked about this difficult period, Ms. Romano is diplomatic but clear. "We often think of abuse as something physical," she told us from her Park Avenue office. "But the most insidious kind is the one that convinces you that you are worthless. It's the voice that tells you you're stupid, that you're less. My new mission is to give women their voices back and to silence the voice that tells them to stay small." The article didn't even mention his name. He wasn't a person. He wasn't a villain. He was an experience, an it, a voice. He was a footnote, a catalyst, a bad memory she had already metabolized into rocket fuel. He dropped the magazine onto the linoleum floor. The unfortunate first marriage, the experience. He had spent 5 years trying to climb a ladder to be someone. He had clawed his way into La Sfera d'Oro, the pinnacle of his world, only to find out the mousy, worthless girl he'd been kicking at his feet had owned the entire mountain. He stumbled out of the store, the cold, damp air hitting his face. He didn't just lose a wife. He didn't just lose a job. He had been holding the winning lottery ticket for the entire world, and he had set it on fire just to watch it burn. He finally understood Antonio Romano's final word, to him verme, worm. He had been a parasite, and the host had finally and calmly brushed him off. Miles away in her new corner office overlooking Central Park, Helen Romano finished a presentation. The Helen's Haven project was officially going national. The boardroom was filled with lawyers, city planners, and investors, all of whom hung on her every word. "The projections are clear," she said, her voice crisp and commanding, echoing in the quiet room. "Phase 2 will see us breaking ground in Chicago and Los Angeles by the 4th quarter. I want the legal framework finalized by June. Questions?" A hand went up. "Ms. Romano, the timeline is aggressive." Helen smiled. It was a small, sharp, confident expression. "Aggression is what's required. These women don't have time for us to be polite. We get this done. Next." Her father Antonio sat at the far end of the table. He was not Papa. He was Mr. Romano, a board member. And he was beaming. He watched his daughter command the room, a woman reborn. This was his legacy. Not the steel and glass, but the fire and will he saw in his daughter's eyes. The meeting adjourned. The room emptied, leaving just Helen and Antonio. "You were good, figlia mia," he said, walking over. "No, you were better than good. You were—" "I was better than you," Helen teased, packing her briefcase. "You would have yelled. I just used the data." He laughed, a full, genuine sound. "This is what you were made for, Helen. Not that." He didn't have to say Mark's name. Helen paused, zipping the bag. She looked out the window at the city spread out below her, a kingdom she had once run from, and now intended to rule. "He did one good thing for me, Papa," she said quietly. "He did nothing." "No, he did," she insisted, turning to face him. "He spent 5 years trying to make me small. He tried to break me down, to make me into nothing." She picked up her briefcase, her posture perfect. "He failed, and in doing so he showed me exactly how strong I am. You can't know you're unbreakable until someone tries to break you. She kissed her father on the cheek. I have another meeting. Don't wait up. He watched her walk out. She was no longer Helen Vance, the runaway. She was no longer Helen Ellison, the victim. She was Helen Romano, the head of the Romano Foundation. And she was just getting started. The fall of Mark Ellison was as swift as it was complete, a perfect example of what happens when arrogance meets a truth it cannot comprehend. And the rise of Helen Romano is a powerful lesson. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember she was already a queen. What did you think of Mark's devastating, career-ending mistake? Do you think Helen should have revealed her secret to him sooner, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section below. We read every single one. If you love stories about secret identities, shocking twists and righteous justice, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit share and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. Thank you for listening.